Hello, this is Pacific.ca broadcasting from the Pacific coast of Canada. Today, we will hear from Douglas Filter, alerting us of the media manipulation, which twists, distorts our political system. Here is Bo.
Some of you are old enough to know and have read broadly enough to know that the kings of old almost universally sought to control public opinion and to keep their minions pacified, subjects of their domain. And as time went on, finally, as we know from history, that the yearnings for freedom and justice and constitutional democracies and the dream of democracy, government for, by, and of the people, eventually rose loud enough that here in Canada and the United States, we enshrine freedom of the media, freedom of the press in both of our constitutions. It first happened in the US in 1791, and not until 1982 in Canada, which is almost 200 years later. So I'm going to focus most of the history on the US. Canada has run a parallel path, but mostly dominated by developments in the US.
And realistically, the viewers, I mean, you and me, we hold the media to account, because if we see a story that we don't believe, or if we see the government saying that it did something and it didn't, you, me, or other media will touch on that.
So you're not worried that people are going to be misled because you think we're smart enough to realize what makes sense and what doesn't. You have more trust in people. That some people are more cynic and they will think, oh, well, that misinformation is going to lead people to think that we need a war, when in fact we don't need a war.
Yes, you always run that risk. But the government is going to use any medium it can to publicize its goals. So, I think any government, but I think the way that you make sure that another government that might say be specifically focused on one specific policy or on their policies, ideologically focused, right? I think they're going to find any medium they can to promote their policy. So, we want to go to war. If they have state-run media, they're going to cover state-run media with, we want to go to war. If they don't, they're going to go to the papers that are most sympathetic and say, print this. They'll pay them to print it. They're the government. They have that power. So they're going to do it anyway. And I think the way we ensure ourselves is by promoting a free media, so that when the government brings this to the table, whether it's state-run media or something else, when they go on the Knowledge Network and say, look at all of these things that we've done that have made things better, well, then you have the other media and, yes, a review board for the consumer to go to that will say, hey, no, you're wrong, and publicize that. And that gets attention as a story.
All right, so things that we don't hear through the media, we go to the internet and find a lot more information. If it's not on CBC or the regular TV, we go to the internet. So you think that more people are going to the internet now than to the old television?
Yes, even in the case of younger families who do have a house and sort of a TV, people with TVs aren't paying for cable as much anymore, or satellite. It's expensive.
We're paying for telephones and internet.
Exactly. So if you pay for the internet, you pay for Netflix, which obviously has a long way to go, and I'd like a more Canada-made solution. That's how people are going now. That's how I go.
We might start with a gentleman that gives us a good overview of the message of a free press. This is Chief Justice Hugo Black, and he wrote in a decision that encapsulated the mandate of a free press. And I'm going to quote from him. In the First Amendment, the Founding Fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. And paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die for foreign fevers and foreign shot and shell. End of quote.
Can you tell us a little bit about who the CRTC is, who appoints them, the commissioners, and is there a problem with commissioners that are perhaps more favoring the industry rather than the public, the average citizen?
The CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, is meant to regulate not only broadcasting, so television and radio, but also telecommunications, so cell service, mobile service, and so on. And there's some talk about merging those functions as well. Since it's all kind of blurry now, you can watch video on your phone. And the CRTC consists of, legally it consists of commissioners. I think there's about 16 at any given time that are appointees. They're supposed to, the CRTC as a whole is supposed to have an arm's length relationship with government, but the commissioners are government appointees. Most people view them as being mainly a, what do you call it, like a complaints mediator, so that when big companies have arguments with one another, they're almost like a business mediator. And so public interest groups often feel, well, where the heck is the public in that? And in fact, I've heard people say that CRTC staff actually talk about their clients as being the license holders, the people that hold the broadcasting and telecommunications licenses, i.e. the businesses are their clients, not the public. And then the other issue that's been brought up when people question how well the CRTC is doing a job of representing the public is that most or many CRTC commissioners, if you look at the CRTC's website and click, their biographies, are coming from the industry, in particular the cable and broadcast distribution undertaking industry. And then when they leave the CRTC, they go back to that industry. So, it's hard. I think any logical person would come to the conclusion it's hard to be truly dependent when you spend all your life in that milieu and that your bread and butter is coming from there when you leave the CRTC too. So, that sets up an extremely difficult environment for them to function objectively, I think, and for the public to, expect for their issues to be understood.
Do you worry about cable companies having a monopoly on the distribution of information?
No,
that's not a problem.
Okay, I'm an old guy now. I'm in my late 40s.
Oh yeah.
I don't have cable anymore. I can't imagine somebody who's aged 23, 24 ever getting cable, because who would want to have to be forced to watch a television program at 8 o'clock p.m. on a Wednesday night if, no, you want to watch it when you want to watch it.
Yeah.
The cable as we know it, cable broadcasting as we know it, will be dead within 5 years. There will be a few pensioners left watching it, but it will die out because nobody wants that. People want to watch their stuff when they want to watch it without advertising.
So I'll keep doing this program for another 5 years.
So propagandists molded public opinion in World War II, much like they did in World War I. While winning the war, the U.S. elite set its sights on world domination. Vice President Wallace, aware of Hitler's ambition at the time, or he was aware that Hitler's ambition was not only confined to Germany, and he said so in the New York Times in 1944. I quote him: "The really dangerous American is the man who wants to do in the United States what Hitler does in Germany. His method is to poison the channels of public information. The problem is never how best to present the truth to the public, but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving him and his group more money or more power. They claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but are the spokesmen for monopoly and vested interest. Their final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power so that, using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjugation. End of quote.
But going back to the question of monopoly, it's not just the TV aspect, but it's also the internet. Because you have to have a provider, which could be Shaw or Rogers, but they're a very concentrated market. Either it's Bell Telephone or Shaw or Rogers. And do you find it problematic that there is a small concentration of providers and people have to pay actually $30, $40 to access the internet?
Years ago, when I lived in a small rural town, I was involved with a group of people. We brought the internet to town. And we worked through the whole process of what it would take to set up internet so people could have it and that sort of thing.
What town was it?
Lillooet.
Oh, okay.
This is back in the 90s when internet was still, in the urban centers you had it, but in most small towns there was no internet at all. And we created our society to put it online and have us have that sort of stuff. And it was a task to get done, but we managed to do it as a local town. But ultimately, finally, the big corporations came in and were interested and provided it, and then that was the end of us.
Oh, because they bought you out.
Bought the system. I remember what happened is TELUS showed up and offered high-speed internet. Well, we weren't in a position to offer that, so that was the end of us.
They had to pay TELUS to get access, whereas with Lillooet you had a non-profit organization.
It was a non-profit. We had to charge a fee for people to be allowed to be online because we, couldn't do it for free. There was costs. But when the high speed became an option from a corporation, then that was the end of the local Lilloonet ceased to be.
So the radio waves and the air are also a limited bandwidth, and more we see telephone companies and internet providers grabbing it and basically squeezing out public broadcasters. I noticed that in Coop Radio in Vancouver. They were recently bought off or traded for some money with some corporation. And some people see that problematic, that we're losing this public airwaves to private corporations. You see any problem with it?
Where to start with this? Yes and no. The CRTC has made it much easier for people to start a community radio station. The process to start your own low-watt community radio station is become basically a very simple form to fill out. The other side of it is we have all these private radio stations and we have nothing. We have nothing left anymore. What's happened? Nothing interesting. There's nothing interesting left out there.
Okay, the content is not interesting. So
what we have,
who listens to it?
I mean, people sort of listen in the background, but
I thought that those 9 organizations that you mentioned, are they actually managing the community channel through a cable company?
Yes, they hold in fact, there's 10, I should correct. 9 of them have over-the-air licenses, so that means they've got their own broadcast tower. And, they transmit over the air, and they're automatically, under CRTC policy, also carried on cable. And they, starting this fall, again, thanks to CRTC, a CRTC ruling last year, they'll be carried on satellite for the first time, too.
But it's almost impossible for any group to challenge that management right, because CRTC regulation does not apply unless the cable company does not want to do the management of that channel. So if they,
That's right. If there isn't a cable community channel in a licensed area, another group can apply to have that 2%. But it's really silly in that to meet the requirement of having a community channel in an area, a cable company is supposed to show that 60% of the programming seen in that area is really local to the area.
So the rule is there, but it doesn't have to be observed.
Apparently, there's problems of enforcement, and there's continual loopholes. Every time cable companies go for a license renewal, they ask for some special exception to the rules, and they're almost always given it.
So is it more the economic aspect of it that limits it to those two, or is it just people don't want
Yeah, I mean, it's the stations don't get the same advertising dollars they did in the past. Advertising is going elsewhere. I think they probably all could do it a bit more efficiently, effectively, and they might be able to do it better, but there isn't, they aren't doing it. But what you aren't getting is with all these new, there is, I can't remember the number now, 10, 15, 20 new community radio stations in BC that started since 2000. Small scale community radio stations.
Where?
The first two were in Lillooet and
Okay.
in Nelson. But we now have Salt Spring, we have one in Cowichan Lake, we have them all over the province. Small, really small ones, and they have just volunteer citizens who are doing talk shows now. So it is out there, and it is happening on a different level. It's very, so Salt Spring Radio. Well, if you're on Salt Spring, you can hear it. Not
So-
necessarily everywhere on Salt Spring, but you can hear it on Salt Spring. But it's happening there, and it's local now. It's much more local than you would have gotten in the past.
Yeah. So you're saying it's possible if people put their minds together and their money
Yeah.
together and do it other than the existing corporate sponsored station, whether it's TV or radio.
This is John Stockwell. He actually led the CIA Angola war for over 2 years. He's the highest ranking CIA official to go public and try to tell the truth, in his own words. He said that a third of his staff worked full-time writing disinformation for the media, and that they would leak it to the press, and the world press would gobble it up and send it out in stories and print it verbatim as if this was real news, and it was all propaganda.
Except for the 20 or so cities where we upgraded our transmitters to digital last summer. So in your case, the nearest one's Vancouver. That's the only place in BC where a CBC transmitter was upgraded to digital. Everywhere else in Canada, people are going to lose free over-the-air TV. And it's happening simultaneously here in Ontario. Our educational broadcaster, TVO, announced that they're shutting off 100 of their little repeater sites across the province. But in TVO's case, in April, they sent out letters to every one of those affected communities and said, hey, we can't afford to maintain these anymore. Would you like them? And they're actually giving their towers to the communities. And why would a community want a tower? You could keep, for it's a couple $1,000s a year, maybe to supply power to one of those old analog transmitters. You can keep CBC going indefinitely. You can use the tower for a community TV or radio channel. If you want to do the upgrade to digital yourself over time, it's not, prohibitive. It's cheap actually compared to a whole community being forced onto cable or satellite. A community could then offer 6 or 8 multiplex channels together from one digital box. Remember I mentioned the digital, you can pack more channels in. Or you can even offer wireless internet. So the CBC transmitters, as well as the towers they're mounted on, are extremely valuable infrastructure throughout rural Canada. So we're very upset that the CBC was just planning to, dismantle them and put them in dumpsters. There was no outreach similar to TVO. So we've mounted a campaign the last month to let communities know. So municipalities, band councils, we've contacted community television organizations, anyone we think might understand the significance of that infrastructure, that if they just ask for that analog transmitter, you can keep the CBC going indefinitely. And if there's a tower available too, or the community wants to do the digital upgrade over time, you can think about offering all these other services. And it's very, very important for rural communities because if they're, as you know, lots of areas still on dial-up because there is no commercial providers or there is no cell service, or they've never thought that they could have a community TV or radio channel. So having their own tower and an analog transmitter to get them started is a big, jump up. We talk about being a wired economy and wanting nobody to be left behind. This is really, really important infrastructure.
The acquiring of the tower and the transmitter is just part of the whole system because you also need a license to broadcast, right? So even if the community got the tower and the hardware of the old analog equipment, and if they even wanted to upgrade it to digital, what is CRTC saying about the license of a group to broadcast?
Well, if the group just wants to keep an analog transmitter going, particularly if it's a low power transmitter, like it's a small community, they don't even need a license. I forget what the cutoff is, but if it's only broadcasting out to about 12 kilometers and it's below 500 watts or something, don't quote me, I'd have to double check. But low power ones, you don't even need a license if you're just rebroadcasting the CBC. All that you would have to do is indicate to Industry Canada that there's been a change in ownership of the transmitter. So if somebody reported they were getting interference or something, Industry Canada just needs to know who owns that transmitter now. If you actually wanted to repurpose that transmitter, so stop using it for the CBC, but reapply to the CRTC for a license for a community channel, then sure, you have to apply for a license, but it doesn't cost anything. The CRTC has been very, it's been very easy to give out community radio and television licenses. It's more about organizing yourself at your end, where you're going to, where you're going to do your production, or do you have a computer to play it back? It's the production end of it that would be, more to think about than the transmitter itself. Is pretty straightforward.
Okay, well anyway, by now we've got a new generation of public relations experts. This was John Rendon. John Rendon. He was featured in a 2005 issue of Rolling Stone magazine under the article titled, "The Man Who Sold the Iraq War." Rendon was President Bush's general in the war propaganda. And his firm, the Rendon Group, they made millions of dollars of contracts off of the government. And it was hired specifically, I quote, to create the conditions for the removal of Hussein from power. So working under an extraordinary secrecy and power of secret authority, Rendon assembled anti-Saddam militants and personally gave them the euphemistic title Iraqi National Congress to make it look like it was a real democracy when it was back as a CIA front. Rendon describes himself as a perception manager, an information warrior. And he says, we've been in, starting with Panama, we've been in every war. And of course, what we got from the success of their PR was Desert Storm, January 16th, 1991.
The 623 towers and transmitters that are being shut down, why are they shutting them down instead of, as you said, upgrading them to digital?
Well, as I mentioned, the CBC has over 6 times the number of transmitters out in the field as any other single broadcaster. So the cost is enormous. The digital transition, it costs in the order of at least a couple $100,000. Like in a big city from a big tower, like a high power transmitter, can be a couple of $100,000 to do the upgrade. So the CBC got a 10% budget cut from the federal government, and what they've been saying is that they would rather put that into content rather than infrastructure. You'd have to debate with CBC executives whether that's a good decision. To me, I feel it's short-lived because infrastructure you can't get back. Once it's gone, it's gone. Whereas, content is always made in trash. Do you know what I mean? It's turning over all the time. So if we had a couple bad years on content, that could be brought back, but this infrastructure never will.
I don't watch TV.
Okay. But you have internet, and internet
Exactly.
comes through one of those providers which are either a monopoly or a conglomerate of few providers.
It's true, and I mean, I certainly watch a lot of shows online, but online you have access to so much more information, right? I can go to the Knowledge Network, right? I can go to CBC, but I can also go to Al Jazeera if I want. I can go anywhere for information. And so it behooves me as the viewer to find what I want to listen to. And I think that, again, is how media holds itself to account. Are there problems? Of course there's problems. It's very easy to turn on, the CBC. It's, channel number 2. If I ever do watch TV, it's probably the CBC. So am I hearing one specific thing? Sure. But I think that when you have something like the Knowledge Network, and yeah, it's similar to the CBC when you see funding being brought down, you want the state, so in this case the province, to fund that media, to fund the Knowledge Network, to provide the best information to the citizens. British Columbians have a right to know.
but it means that the CBC is becoming a specialty service like TSN or Discovery. You've got to buy a pay TV service to get it, and I don't think that's right.
This is Craig Fuller of Hill and Knowlton. It's another leading PR firm. And he set up a front group in 1991 along with Rendon called Citizens for a Free Kuwait. There's a huge story here. We won't have time to talk about it. You've heard about the incubators and that were left to die on the floor. All this was fake news. We won't get into that story, but it's an incredible story how that all came down. Now, like Rendon Fuller, there are actually dozens of PR firms jockeying for these lucrative contracts from the U.S. government.
So it seems like this is a political issue rather than a technological one, because the CBC can say, well, we're
money.
doing it because of the cut, the 10% cut,
right.
and that comes from politicians, the finance minister that decided to go on austerity budget. So
That's right.
So how can we fight that? How can we oppose that?
Vote NDP next time. But I mean, in the short term, I think we need to try to save the CBC's infrastructure. And so I think there's an issue here about what happens not only to the CBC towers, but the channels all across the country that used to be for public use. Because as an organization that represents community TV, we've been saying for several years now there should be one channel, one frequency set aside in every community. So a community group could get a community TV license. And that's just not possible in big cities for community TV or radio. All the frequencies are taken. But there's always been one channel set aside for use by the public broadcaster, 2 radio for English and French and 2 TV for English and French. And, we're concerned that idea of reservation for public use is going to disappear as well going forward. So for a number of reasons, we think it's really important that communities step forward and say, we want that channel and we want that tower.
Mm-hmm. And the community needs to be conscious of what we're losing, because if we are not conscious of it, then nobody cares. And
That's right.
Slowly, like the frogs that boil in the pot, we're slowly...
Well, I think people do care, but they don't know how to articulate what the problem is, right? Mm-hmm. These changes slowly happen, but people don't know why.
Yeah.
The erosion of our social services has been gradually happening for more than 30 years. So, losing the infrastructure of old technology now, along with the public domain of airwaves, is only the symptom of an ongoing, much deeper social dysfunction. That is, the domination of market economy, where public airwaves are for sale, information becomes not a human right but a commodity. I suggest that there is a disconnect between the majority of citizens and the political representatives who legislate and implement the supremacy of market capitalism. A framework of a solution is written in this booklet, Perpetual Direct Democracy, published by Amazon.com, and you can also read it for free online at pacific.ca.